Good afternoon, guys. How are you? Welcome to week 2. Of course, welcome to the world's greatest econ class. I'll start in a minute or two. I'll let the class populate, and then we'll formally begin. All right? All right, guys, let's begin the class. So first of all, who's happy with Dan Andrews' announcement today? I feel happy. I'm pretty all right. I'm a movie buff, like I told you, so I'm gonna book my next movies before the next lockdown. Well, I hope there is no lockdown 6, but you never know. That's what I said when before lockdown 3 and 4. So I'm just gonna get a few things done, of course, following all the safety requirements, but I'll get those done before we have another one. But yay, good times ahead, guys, which also means now don't take my word for it because I haven't heard anything officially, all right? But logically speaking, next week we will be meeting face to face. So I'm looking forward to it. But wait for the official announcement, okay? I don't want to end up at uni, and you don't want to end up in uni, only for the security guards to chase us away. So let us hear from the uni officially that the classes will be face to face. But you know what? I think they are. I am pretty sure, 99%. It's going to be face to face next week. So yay! Can't wait to meet all of you in person. Now today's class is interesting. Interesting because there is a lot to think about. It's not hard. It's not hard at all. It's pretty straightforward. The concepts are very much linked to our real life, our actual personal lives as well. So for some of the concepts, you might want to relate things to what's happening at your end. But yeah, it's not hard. It's interesting, gets you thinking, and something I would say even after the class is over, think about the concepts, just ponder over them. It's not philosophical level tough, of course not. It's pretty straightforward, but something to think about. And the reason I keep saying this is because there will be a few classes later on which are full on, just calculations the entire class, or diagrams all over the board. So this is not one of them. So good time to just lay back, relax, and think about economic concepts before you get slightly bombarded with harder topics. Now, yeah, a lot of things to be done today. I want to get a few slides done. I want to quickly go over a few items on the LMS again, in case some people missed my instructions last week, but I'll do that at the end. Then there is a little fun quiz to be done as well. No marks. You'll be doing at your end. And you'll be either happy with yourself or maybe you'll go, I need to work more. But I'm not, no judging and no judgments in my class. So I won't know what you have scored, but it's going to be a fun quiz. You can just do it at your end. I will share the link with you. So we're going to do a quiz. We'll be doing slides. I'm going through the LMS, and we'll be doing workshop questions as well. So quite a few things to be done today, but the topics are easy, so we'll cruise. Okay, easy peasy. So let's begin with the topics straight away, huh? The topics for today. So as I said, first we will do the slides. That's my plan. Once the slides are done, we'll see how it goes. I want to show you something online. I want to share a few links with you as well. Then, yeah, we'll do the quiz. Then we'll do the workbook questions. And then somewhere in between, I will talk about a few announcements as well, in case people have missed. All right? So concepts first, slides first. Let us begin. Let us begin with unemployment. Can you believe it? I just said, yay, looking forward to the class, and boom, I'm talking about something very depressing. And in fact, this is something that has hit a lot of our lives, or maybe people around you, unemployment. Especially pandemic times are very hard, or very tough times. Back in the days, the global financial crisis around 2008, 9, 10. And then, of course, you go back, you had the Great Depression as well. So terrible things have happened in the past, but economies bounce back. If you look at the business cycle, it's like a wave, right? It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. You have the peaks where the economy is doing great and everyone is celebrating. And then you have the troughs, the bottom, where you hit the rock bottom literally and things are not looking good. People are unemployed, depressed, there are mental health issues because of all the terrible things happening around. Unemployment is one of them. Now, we know what unemployment is, not having a job, but let's be a bit slightly more specific, okay? In order to be classified as unemployed, you need to be looking for a job. So you need to not just, nothing against this person, okay? On the screen who is sitting with a placard that says looking for a job. Nothing against them, but what's important is you should be applying for jobs. And some of you might know how Centrelink works as well. So you have to give proof that you have been applying for jobs. So basically the economic term is actively seeking employment. Actively seeking employment. So actively literally means not just giving a call and saying, "Yay, yo, you got a job." No, all right, I applied, done. No, you got to look at the position dossier. You have to officially apply properly with the cover letter, selection criteria, your CV, and if after doing that, after looking for jobs in person or online, and after applying, you're still not getting a job, then you are unemployed, okay? So if you are unemployed or if you are employed, unemployed and employed together make up the labor force. So let me write that down for you on the screen, okay? So just repeating what I just said. I'm back. Now you guys are going to get used to this, all right? Audio cutting off and coming back. But yeah, thanks for letting me know. Let me know when that happens. So I'm just going to type something on the screen. What I just said, I'm just going to repeat that. So I was talking, I think this is the point where it got cut. I was talking about labor force. And labor force is basically employed plus unemployed people, okay? So I was talking before, I'm not sure at what point the audio got cut, but at 2:13, what's the time? That's when the audio got cut. Yeah, okay, should be all right. So basically you are unemployed if you have been looking for a job and still you don't get a job, okay? And the other opposite of that is you have a job, you're employed, all right? So the labor force is made up of employed and unemployed people. Just remember that part. But now, guys, the other question is, if labor force is employed plus unemployed, and I just said in order to be classified as unemployed, you should be seeking employment very actively. Okay, all right. But then what about other people? What about the people who don't want to work? So they won't be a part of the labor force. Let's write that down as well. So who is not in the labor force? Okay, let's make a list of who is not in the labor force. Well, first of all, those who don't want to work, right? Those who don't want to work. As in, they're not applying for jobs actively, can't be bothered. I don't want to work. Okay. Well, mate, if you don't want to work and you're capable of working, or you're able and capable of working and you still don't want to work, you're not in the labor force. Okay. Second, those who are genuinely not able to work. Now, this could be because of, it could be because of physical or mental health issues. Either they could be disabled. Okay, so I would just say not able to work. Okay, for example, I'm not saying everyone disabled is not able to work. No, I'm saying some people with certain types of disabilities are unable to work. Those people who are genuinely not able to work are not in the labor force. Okay. The third category, overage. So that means retired, basically. If you're retired, you're not in the labor force. And then what's the opposite of that? Underage. Okay, kids. I mean, you're not going to walk up to a little kid, little child and say, hey, you're unemployed. You're not. No, they're not allowed to work. It's illegal. Okay, so if you're underage, until you reach the legal age to work, you are not in the labor force. Okay, so don't tell little children, hey, you're unemployed. Tell them, hey, you're not in the labor force. Okay, so this was about labor force and employed and unemployed people. Now, coming to the main part of this whole unemployment bit. There are 5 terms that you need to know when it comes to unemployment. Okay, I'm going to write those down and then I will talk about them. Okay, so let us draw as well a little bit. So it is this unemployment. Okay, this unemployed that I'm going to focus on now. Okay, I'm going to put them into 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 categories. Let's write those down. Okay, first one, in no particular order really, but the first one will be frictionally unemployed. Frictional unemployment or frictionally unemployed. The next one, that, and I'm just doing the ones for this subject. Okay, I mean, there are different articles and different magazines. You can go on and on and on and on and on with the categories. You can make your own category as well, but for our syllabus, these are the key areas that we are looking at. Okay, the next one is structurally unemployed or structural unemployment. The next is cyclical unemployment. Some of you may call it cyclical, but it's actually pronounced as cyclical. Comes from the term business cycle. So cyclical unemployment. Then you have natural rate of unemployment. And last, you have something called full employment. Okay, so these are the terms you need to know, or rather I would say need to understand when it comes to the unemployment part of today's topic. All right. So first one is frictional. Frictional is temporary. Temporary, okay? Now, why could there be temporary unemployment? It could be the pandemic situation we are going on. Would you blame that? Maybe. Sometimes you're working in hospitality and the government says, well, no more dine-in. Boom, you're told by the boss, our restaurant's closing, it's only takeaway. I'm going to need maybe 2 chefs, 1 more person. Other people stay home until the lockdown is lifted and we can have dine-in again. So let's say you're working in that sector. You'll have to wait until the announcement is made that you can get back to work. Until then, you're unemployed. So that could be frictional, temporary. Okay. For some people who are sessionals like me, sessional people like me keep it very flexible. Now, we're freelancers, right? I've been a freelancer for 9 years now, and I'm loving it because it's pretty flexible. But when the uni goes on a break, okay, between 2 semesters, there is nothing to teach. Okay, of course, I keep myself busy with my business, but from teaching point of view, I don't get paid because I don't teach in that period. When the semester begins, I'm back. So in that period between 2 semesters, technically from teaching point of view, not my business, but teaching point of view, I'm unemployed. But I know I will be back. My contract will continue when the semester begins again. So I'll be frictionally unemployed. So sometimes I'll give you another example. Let's say you graduate and you get a confirmation, you get a permanent job in a nice corporation. Well done. So, but that job's going to start in 2 months, and you give your existing employer a notice that you're going to leave. You're quitting. Let's say you quit, and the next job is going to start in a month's time. What are you in that 1 month time? Doing nothing. You're frictionally unemployed. If anything's not clear, let me know, okay? Otherwise, I'll just assume that you guys have understood what I'm saying. That's frictional, guys, with these 3 examples. Let's move on. The next is structural unemployment. Structural is where your skills do not match with the requirements of your workplace. Now, there are 2 ways of looking at it. One, you apply at a place and they say, well, your skills don't match us, so sorry. Or let's say you're already working at a place and they go through an organizational restructure. You see La Trobe's going through a restructure as well. And in that restructuring, people lose jobs. That is also structural unemployment. Another way of looking at it is you are employed and the organization brings in new technology. They upgrade themselves, okay? Or they start offering new services and they tell you, hey, we are now offering these new services, so you need to upskill yourself. You need to get this particular certificate in yada yada, okay? Let's say we are now offering some IT services as well. You have to get a certificate done, a tiny 1-month course sponsored by us in IT coding. And you go, can't do, sorry. My brain doesn't work with IT, sorry. I'm a finance person. Guess what, guys? True story. This happened 5 years ago. This happened with NAB, National Australia Bank. Okay, my friends, 2 of my friends were in that. Actually, luckily they are still working. They're working in finance for the bank. One of them is actually, what is that term? I forgot the term. But anyway, she checks for money laundering and catches people. Forensic, there you go, forensic finance, and she's into forensic accounting. So she was told with her finance master's degree in finance from Monash, she was told that she has to get an tiny 1-month IT course done, whatever tiny components were. She had to do it. She did it. She's a smart person. She did it, and she still has her job. But she told me there were 2 other people in the organization in their 40s and 50s who said, sorry, we have been in the organization for 10 years and 20 years, and we have so much of experience, and we are working for finance. We're not working for IT. We are not IT people. So we are not going to do it. You know what? They were laid off. They were fired, basically. So that's also structural unemployment, because their skills, they felt that they had enough experience to back up their case, but the organization said, sorry, we are moving on, it's a new era, we are providing new services, there are new requirements, sorry, get this done, otherwise your skills don't match what we want, out. So that is structural unemployment. The next is cyclical unemployment. Now, this is very simple. Cyclical unemployment is basically when there is a gap, a shortage of jobs. Okay? So in very simple terms, if there are 100 people looking for a job and only 99 jobs available, there is a shortage of 1 job, right? So that is unemployment because of shortage. So it's nothing to do with your skills. It's nothing to do with the effort you're putting in. It's not to do whether it's temporary or not. It's just shortage. What to do? More graduates than the jobs available. That shortage is called cyclical unemployment. Now, the last 2 that you see on the screen, natural rate of unemployment and full employment, those 2 are actually a combination of the first 3. You want to know how? Check this out. I'm going to write it on the screen. I'll draw and write. So, everyone with me? Natural rate of unemployment is the addition of frictional and structural. So frictional unemployment plus structural unemployment gives you natural rate of unemployment. Okay, so this one here is the addition of these two. You get the number of frictionally unemployed, you get the number of structurally unemployed, you add both of them, and what you get is natural rate of unemployment. All right, next, full employment. Would you like to take a few seconds to yourself? You don't have to answer to me, to yourself, and guess what is full employment? Take a few seconds. Tell yourself, full employment, this is what it is. Want to guess? I'm going to tell you now, okay? And after I tell you, give me a thumbs up if what I said is exactly what you thought as well. If what I say is different to what you thought about, don't give a thumbs up, all right? So let's see if we match. Ready? I'll tell you what is full employment. Full employment in economics, of course, full employment in economics is the absence of cyclical unemployment. So not having cyclical unemployment at all. How many of you matched me? Did anyone also have the same answer? Don't think so, right? It's tricky, isn't it? Because if you don't remember this, you might write a wrong answer on the exam. You might end up saying full employment is no unemployment. No, that's not right. No, full employment means no cyclical unemployment. So can I put this in easier terms, guys? Can I say this in an easier way? What else can I say? Can I say no cyclical unemployment in some other way? Yeah, I can. All I need to say is no shortage of jobs. So let me rephrase in a very easier way. Full employment is, you tell me now, you complete the sentence. Full employment is the absence, full employment is having no shortage of jobs. So no shortage of jobs in the economy is full employment. Now you must be wondering, okay, if there are no shortages of jobs, doesn't it mean everyone is employed? Is it, guys? Is it the same thing? If there are no shortages of jobs, let's say 100 people are looking for a job and there are 100 jobs available. 100 people looking for a job, 100 jobs available, no shortage, hence full employment. That is correct. But my question to you is, in that situation, is it guaranteed that those 100 people will get those 100 jobs? No. I'll tell you why. I'll make a very simple example out of it. Let's say, I'm going to keep things simple, okay? Let's say there are 100 accountant jobs available. 80 accountants are looking for accountant jobs. 20 people are, what should I say? Let's look at a different field. 20 people have studied biotechnology. So there you go. 20 people are looking for a biotechnologist job. 80 people are looking for accountant jobs. 100 accountant jobs available. Technically, the numbers match, but those biotechnologists are not going to work as accountants, right? So there is a mismatch of skills. So they could be. Yes, you guys are right. And by the way, Nathan is saying in the chat box, no, because company may not find perfect, Nathan. Exactly. So you're bringing the idea towards structural unemployment. Correct. And Michaela, you're saying no because of possible outside factors. Yeah, absolutely. Outside factors such as, Michaela, frictional unemployment, right? They could be temporarily unemployed as well. Spot on, guys. So while there may not be shortages of jobs, we may still have frictionally unemployed and structurally unemployed. people. What I'm going to do now is this part, this particular section of today's class, the unemployment section, is done. So I'm going to give you a minute, just a minute, okay? Recap to yourself, take time to yourself, okay? It's always good to sit back and absorb everything. So take a minute, recap in your mind what I've said, and ask me any questions that you may have, okay? If no questions come through, then in a minute or two, I will move to the next part, all right? So take a minute or two. So Gurneet is asking, could I explain frictional again? Gurneet, I'm gonna type in the chat box, okay, this time. So I'm gonna answer you, but I'm gonna type, okay? So Gunrit, sorry, I called you. I didn't pronounce your name correctly before. So Gunrit, check what I've written in the chat box. See if that is making sense, or you like more examples. I'm happy to give more examples. No worries. Glad you got it. Any other questions, guys, before I move on to the next part? Let's have an imaginary countdown timer, okay? Starting with 10, 9, 8, 7, and then I'm going to erase everything. So you got to speak up before that, okay? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, beep. Okay, let's move on. Let's clear this part and let's move to the second part of the slides. GDP. Oh, sorry, Yasmin, just saw your message. You just made it. So Jasmine is asking me in the chat box to explain structural one more time. No problem. Jasmine, structural is where your skills are not matching with what is needed by the organization. Let me write that down quickly in the chat box. All right, Yasmin, have a look at what I've typed in the chat box. Structural is where there is a mismatch of skills. You may be a skilled person, but the skills you have may not be sought after by the employer. All right. So wonderful. Let's move on to GDP. Okay. What is GDP, guys? Today we're going to do a lot of things on GDP, GNP, nominal GDP, real GDP, GDP per capita. So it's a lot to do with GDP. Let us start with what it means, okay, or what's the full form of GDP. GDP is, where is my phone? Where are we going with time? Gross domestic product, but just checking the time. But we're doing good. 2:37. We should be fine today. All right. So GDP is gross domestic product. Okay. Now, what does it mean? There are two ways of looking at GDP. One is income approach. One is expenditure approach. Now, do you guys remember the circular flow diagram from last week? And I kind of said during the circular flow diagram that what we spend is, the incoming revenue for businesses, and what businesses basically, pay us is our income. So their expense towards labor is our income. So I get paid by, think about it this way. I get paid by La Trobe University, so that's my income. It's their expense, okay? And I provide my services. But later on, I'm probably going to, basically my first degree, my second degree, all are from La Trobe. So first, I had paid them as a student. Now they're paying me as an employer. So I know it's not exactly the same, but if you consider the entire economy, everyone, and you look at every single person's accounts, then you'll get an idea that within that economy, everything that's incoming is outgoing, okay? So keeping that in mind, what I'm trying to say is all the expenses in the country should match all the income in the country. Now, if we calculate everyone's income in the country, we are basically using an income approach for calculating GDP. If we calculate all the expenses in the country, we are using an expenditure approach for calculating GDP. Now, there is a fixed formula for an expenditure approach. But before that, let me define GDP for you. I just told you vaguely what it is, but I said it's gross domestic product and it's income approach and expenditure approach. But what is it? Well, GDP is the total value, okay, of all the final finished goods and services produced in a country. So mark each and everything that I said very carefully. I'll repeat it. Ready? It is the total value of all, not just one or two, all the goods and services as well, okay? All the goods and services, or should I just say finished or final goods and services, so not intermediate ones, okay? Finished goods and services, the ones that you're not going to sell again or you're not going to use into something else. If I bought this phone, my phone's not coming up yet, there you go. If I bought this phone, I'm not going to use this phone into something and make another machine out of it. I'm just going to use the phone as it is. So it is a finished final product, okay? So recapping, the total value of all the final or finished goods and services produced in a country. It has to be made in that country. So if we are looking at GDP of Australia, we are going to look at everything, the final value of everything, okay, that is produced in Australia, manufactured in Australia, and that is a final good that is sold to the customer, not goods that are made for industries to reuse again. Okay, so if I make a machinery and that machinery is bought by another company and they use that machine to make something else, we are not counting that machine, okay? We are counting the final finished goods and services, all right? That is GDP. Now, how do we calculate it? I said there are two ways of looking at it: income approach and expenditure approach. Expenditure approach has a formula, and I'm going to write it down for you right now. But the other one is an income approach. Now, guys, think about it this way. Ready? If it's an income approach, basically, we are looking at all the income in the country. Now, why am I saying this? Go back to last week. I'll repeat, go back to last week's circular model. All the income should equal all the expenses, okay? Keep that in mind. All incoming should be equal to all outgoing within the country. We are not talking about foreign transactions. So if that's GDP, then GDP should also represent all the income in the country. So basically, if I'm using the income approach, I can say that GDP tells us the total income of the country, possible, and the total income of the country should be equal to the total expenditure, for which we have a formula, which I'm going to write on the screen for you. It's C, I, G, and X, okay? But I'm going to write it down. C, I'll tell you what is C, what is I, what is G, what is NX. So GDP using expenditure approach is calculated as follows. Okay. C, let's put a space, C plus, I'll leave some space so I can type later on, plus I plus G plus NX. That's your formula, C, I, G, and X. What does C stand for? Consumption. I stands for, made it too complicated. Let me just write it. C plus I plus G plus NX. Now I'll just type in front of it. There you go. So C is for consumption. Everything that we consume within the country. I is investments. Investments into land, okay? Or something that you're not going to sell straight away. Investments. G is for, any guesses? Government spending. So what the government spends on the economy. So what the purchases that the governments make within the economy, okay? So that is government spending. And last is NX, which is called net exports. Or net exports is exports minus imports. So guys, don't get confused by the last part. NX is net exports. Net exports is exports minus imports, okay? So that is how you calculate your GDP. Consumption plus investments plus government spending plus NX, which is net. So it basically consumption plus investments plus government spending plus exports minus imports, okay? That's how you calculate it. So next part. If a particular country's GDP is huge, China has a massive GDP, USA has a huge GDP, India has a big GDP. What could be a few factors that contribute to that huge GDP? It's either or everything, okay? So it's either that these countries have very high consumption, possible. Countries like India, China have a huge population. More the population, more the consumption, right? I mean, if we look at the consumption of 1,000 people, and then we look at the consumption of U25, obviously, 1,000 people or 10,000 people will have more consumption. So yeah, Nathan, you're right. Population, absolutely. So consumption could be because of high populations, yes. Or it could be that people are investing a lot, possible. It could be that your government is really nice and they love to spend on the economy. So government spending on infrastructure, okay. So it could be government spending. Or it could mean that you are heavily exporting and not importing as much. It could mean that your net exports are pretty high. For a country like China, consumption is high because of the population. It's the most populated country on earth, and their exports, net exports, are very high. It's a producer for the world, literally. Now, other countries are catching up, but nowhere close at the moment. So, yeah, net exports are huge. As far as Australia is concerned, Australia's got a good GDP, okay, but nothing compared to the giants. Why? One, we don't have a big population for starters, so our consumption is not that high. Our government, I mean, whether you like or not, okay, let's not enter the labor versus liberal politics, regardless of who they are, okay, whether it's labor or liberals. Overall, compared to other parts of the world, both of these parties are doing a decent job or have done a decent job when it comes to government spending. Of course, we can like or dislike or hate them for some policies, but compared to rest of the world, overall, we are lucky. Both our parties do a pretty decent job as far as government spending is concerned. So that is pretty good, but our consumption is low, investments are all right, and net exports are decent. They're not great. Australia still does heavy imports. Okay, we do export agricultural products, coal, uranium as well, but we struggle in a few other areas. Okay, so yeah, net exports are okay, they're not great. So that's why our GDP, Australian GDP, doesn't appear very massive compared to other countries. Now, before I take a few things further from the GDP part, let me first get out of the way two more concepts, okay? And those are real GDP and nominal GDP, okay? Nominal GDP is GDP at the current time, okay? I'll write those things down for you. Hang on. It'll be easier, you know? So if you see things, it's sometimes easier as well. So I've typed a few things for you guys. You can please check them out. So let's go with the first one, nominal GDP. Now, see, when I told you GDP is, of course, you know, consumption, investment, government spending, exports minus imports. Just pick the consumption part. How would you know the value of consumption? Obviously, you'll have to say what something costs and how many quantities are sold, right? You need the price and quantity. I mean, if you want to calculate how many chocolates were purchased, then you have to categorize them. How many, you know, a particular type of how many chocolates were purchased, how many numbers, and how many quantities, and what was the price for each. And then you have to calculate it. So you need price and quantity each time. Now, in nominal GDP, the current year prices and quantities are used. Or you could say the prices and quantities of the year in question. Don't get confused. I'll tell you very easily. See, if I say what is the nominal GDP of Australia, or what was the nominal GDP of Australia in 2019? Simple. Pick up all the prices from 2019, pick up all the quantities from 2019. Done. If I ask you, what is the nominal GDP of Nepal, okay, in 2015? Simple. Pick all the prices in Nepal from 2015. Pick all the quantities from Nepal from 2015. Done. You get your nominal GDP. But if you were to compare the GDP of your country against your own country, you want to compare how are we Australians doing today compared to how we were doing 20 years ago. What to do now? Things have changed. Price index has changed. Inflation has changed, right? I mean, if you think about it, probably, and you can check out a few historic records, your grandparents could buy a nice property, a nice house for $1,000 or $2,000, right? Your parents, in their time, in their youth, could buy a fantastic house for around $50,000, $60,000. You today have to spend $500,000 to $1 million, right? That's inflation. You could watch a movie, Gone with the Wind, for 50 cents. Now you have to spend $25, $20, depending where you go, or even more. So that is inflation. So obviously, if I were to compare the box office of Titanic, and I want to compare it with Avengers Endgame, it's not a fair comparison because the ticket price for Titanic was different to the ticket price for Endgame. So the best way is just look at the quantities, right? But if we want to get a dollar value for comparison, we use real GDP. So what happens is in real GDP, we use the quantities from those respective years, but we use price from a benchmark period. For example, if we were considering movies, if I want to compare Titanic and Endgame, let's say on an average, Endgame ticket was $25. During the Titanic days, the ticket was $10. Now, what I got to do, I'm going to say, well, let us look at the number of tickets purchased for Titanic. Let us look at the number of tickets purchased for Endgame. But instead of using their respective prices, let's decide which price to use. Let's use it as a benchmark. Use it as a base price. That is a more accurate term, a base price. We could say, let's use the ticket price from the Titanic period. I mean, not the Titanic ship, the movie period, okay? So what we do, we let's say the average tickets were $10 when Titanic was released. We multiply the number of tickets for Titanic by $10. And for Endgame, we also use $10 as the ticket price, not the current one. That way, we are accounting for inflation. That way, it's a fair comparison. So when you want to compare, the GDPs from different periods, you need to account for inflation and use real GDP. Otherwise, if you just want to compare how one country is doing today against another country doing today, then simply use nominal GDP. Okay? Any questions so far, guys, as far as GDP, the nominal GDP, real GDP, and expenditure and income approach is concerned? I'll quickly, super fast, give you a recap of what I've been saying. GDP is the total value of all the finished goods and services produced in a country. We can use an income approach or expenditure approach because according to the circular flow diagram, incoming and outgoing should match. If we use an expenditure approach, it's on the screen. C plus I plus G plus NX is the formula. If you're using an income approach, you're basically looking at the total income in the country, which means you're looking at how much everyone in the country is making. So you can get a total income of a country, or you can get total expenditure in a country. That is your GDP. Nominal GDP uses current or the price and quantity from that period that we are talking about, and real GDP uses base year prices to account for inflation. Any questions before I move to the next part? It is related to GDP. There are a few things to cover, but so far, any questions from anyone? I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it. In fact, you know what? I won't give you 30 seconds. I'm going to give you a nice Uh, it's 2:56. Let's just take a break until 3:05. Okay, so 9 minutes break. I know 9 minutes sounds very odd, but I just want to resume the class at 3:05. So stretch, get a coffee, tea, or hot chocolate Milo, whatever you like. Stretch, feel fresh in case you're feeling sleepy. Browse through what I've just said and get back all fresh to take on the second part of today's class at 3:05. Okay, see you soon. All right, let's get back, everyone. And now, oh, we lost two students. There were 25, now they are 23. Let's just say they have taken opportunity cost pretty seriously and have found a better benefit somewhere else. All right. Well, let's continue. Now things get easier. Okay. I had a student, by the way, who asked me for a little clarification about real GDP. So I've just messaged that student. But to keep it simple, guys, I mean, there are different concepts. We don't have to go through all of them. Okay. But you see, when we calculate the total value in a country, we use something called a basket, something called consumer price index. Now, consumer price index looks at the price levels in the country, and we calculate everything using basket of goods. Now, things can get confusing because I'm saying basket of goods out of nowhere. What do I mean? See, tomatoes cost different to potatoes, right? And even within the tomatoes, there are different varieties of tomatoes that cost different. So baskets is basically categories. Another word for categories. We categorize all the products, the 10,000s and millions of different varieties of products in the country. And for each variety, for each category, we times it, we multiply that by the prices. So we would have, for example, let's say there's a gourmet tomato and a cheap tomato and something else tomato, I don't know, red tomato. I'm just making it up. So I'm going to look at the total price of all gourmet tomatoes, the total for all normal tomatoes, the total for all trust tomatoes. Gonna add those together. That becomes my basket. Then I'm going to look at a variety of potatoes, all that variety in the country for a particular price, for different prices as well. Then I'm going to put all those in one basket. So that's called basket. It's basically categorization to get the broader idea. Now, when we look at these categories, okay, we have to account for inflation because what potatoes cost us now is different to what potatoes cost us a few years ago. So what to do? How to account for inflation? Now, one is you just find the GDPs and then you look at the percentage of inflation and then you multiply that and take it away. That's one way. Or you simply look at real GDP, where you use a base year price and that helps you to compare between 2 years. So even if I'm looking at real GDP of Australia in 2021, that is not the actual GDP. That is a GDP I'm using to compare Australia with a previous year. So real GDP is only to be used during comparison to see have you really done better. If your grandparents were earning an annual salary of $1,000 and you are earning an annual salary of $100,000, it's not fair to say you're earning more than them. Because during their time, during World War, during the 30s and 20s and 40s, things were different. Our grandparents would be even earlier, late 1800, early 1900. Yeah, the salaries were different. The price levels were different. You earned $1,000 a year. You watched a movie for 5 cents. You bought a big bag of potatoes for 10 cents. Things were different. How can you really compare that with today? Isn't it? Well, you could if you account for inflation. And the same is done with GDP as well. So I'll conclude because I need to move on. If you want to compare, you use real GDP. Otherwise, if you want to know exactly how you're doing today against another country in the given period, simply use nominal GDP. Now, my next part is the hype around GDP. A lot of magazines, a lot of newspapers, even commentators really focus heavily on GDP. We see countries fighting, amongst each other that, our GDP is better than your GDP. Our GDP is billions of dollars. Your GDP is only millions of dollars. What's the whole fuss about GDP? In fact, some neighboring countries who don't get along keep comparing. This country's GDP is less than us. Yay, celebrate. Why? Why? What's the big deal about GDP? Well, GDP is important, and that's why we are studying it, obviously. GDP is important because it tells us about the economic activity in the country. I mean, it tells us how much people are consuming, how much is being produced, how much you're exporting, how much your government is spending, how much you're investing. So it is good. It is a good indicator, but it's just overhyped, you know. You can't just say a country is better or is doing better than another country just because the GDP is high. No. And the reason was already mentioned before. Nathan also answered that in the chat box. Population. Different countries have different populations. It does not tell the standard of living of the country. So now I'm going to draw my discussion to standard of living. Well-being and standard of living in different countries. GDP is good to know about economic activity. It's good to know about production. More the production, more the economic activity, more the jobs will be created. GDP is a good indicator of that, period. If you want to have a discussion further about the standard of living, the quality of life, about well-being, GDP is not sufficient. So now what I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to build a few things over GDP to know what else is better. Okay, so the first thing that's better compared to GDP is GDP per capita. I repeat, GDP per capita. Per capita means per person. Literally means, in other words, average GDP. So averaging is good because if we are looking at the income approach tells what is the total income in the country. Well, obviously, if you're looking at the total income of 2 billion people, it's mostly going to be more than the total income of 25 million people, right? So let's get to know the average. What is the average earning? The average is given by GDP per capita. That gives us a better understanding. And then suddenly you will realize some countries who have a lesser total GDP, like Norway, Finland, Switzerland, okay, even New Zealand, and some countries have huge GDPs, you know. Brazil, Indonesia, China, India. The moment you take out the average, the game changes, okay? And it tells us a very different story. China has an average income. You can check the exact numbers, okay? I'll tell you when I know my information is accurate. I'll tell you when I know you can check a few things. So right now, I'm giving you a vague idea. I'm not totally off, but I'm not giving you the accurate numbers. You can check that later. But China's average income is approximately $10,000 per year. 10,000, can you imagine? A few countries in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, they on an average, you know, it goes up and down, but they fluctuate somewhere around 2,000 or 3,000, between $2,000 to $5,000. Some have it as low as $1,000. Afghanistan has even low. I think it could be $800 or $1,000 per year. Very low GDP per capita. I'm talking about per year, guys. You're looking at $60,000 to $90,000 per year, right? As your first job as graduates. Can you think of those being around $1,800 or $4,000 annual? That tells us, that changes the game. It tells us the difference. The moment you account for population, the moment you look at GDP per capita. So my point is that GDP per capita is a better, I'm not calling it the best. I'm saying it's a better indicator for what? For standard of living compared to your regular GDP. So nominal GDP is good, but GDP per capita or nominal GDP per capita is better the moment you look at the averages, okay? But that is not enough as well. Don't you feel you need to check something more? You need to know more, because I'm talking about standard of living. How could I just base my standard of living on income alone? How could I just base my standard of living on production alone? Yes, production is good. Yes, export is good. Yes, economic activity is good. Yes, income is necessary. What will you do without money? But there are other factors apart from money as well, which we need to consider as economists when we look at standard of living. And the next one, hang on, why isn't it going ahead? Is this one. Now let me go back. Give me a second. This happens when you start writing things. It gets carried forward on the next slide. Okay. I'm going to come to this slide later. The next is HDI. Human, would you like to guess what DI is for? Human Development Index. What I'm going to do now, guys, is I'm going to take you to UNDP, United Nations Development Program website, and we're going to look at a few things together with respect to HDI. Just to give you a brief idea, Human Development Index already includes, so it is made up of something. It includes the average income. So I just said average income is better than the total income. So it considers average income, but in addition to that, it looks at two other factors. One is the average life expectancy at birth, and another is the quality and retention of education. So let's look at that together on the UNDP website. All right. Let me share that with you. HDI was co-founded by two people. One received Nobel Prize in Economics for his contribution. He comes from India. His name is Amartya Sen. So thanks to him, we have this modified and new version of Human Development Index, HDI. So here it is. I hope my screen sharing has begun at your end as well. I'm basically on the UNDP website. Yeah, it's good to use such reliable sources instead of just looking up things online. And it's easy. It doesn't take time. You get the data ready and you know it's reliable data as well. So let's check this out together, how HDI works. You got the ranking. This is HDI ranking. Country names, well, listed according to the rank. The score is out of 1. So Norway is number 1 in the world for Human Development Index. And the score is 0.957 out of 1. And it goes on and on and on, okay? The countries that are very lowly ranked, whose ranks are below 100, basically their score is around 0.7, 0.6-ish. So these are the scores. Now, I told you it's made up of a few things, right? I said it's made up of life expectancy at birth, expected years of schooling, which of course depends on the quality of education and access to education as well. So, some things reflect a few other things, isn't it? Life expectancy at birth kind of reflects the healthcare system, the support, the prenatal, postnatal support that is provided, hospitals quality. Expected years at schooling kind of reflects access to education and quality of education as well. And education is not just one. I mean, it's made up of these two. So you got the life expectancy part, the education part, and then the third one is the GNI, that is gross national income. Basically, it's GDP using income approach. The one I told you, the entire income, but this is per capita. So it is GDP per capita, okay? The average income in the country. So the average income, education standards, and life expectancy, all of them combined together give you a score. And then that score gives you a ranking. Where are we? Where is Australia? Australia is at number 8. Not bad, at least in the top 10. 0.944. Life expectancy is 83.4. It's actually more than Norway. I think only a few have it more than us, Switzerland and Hong Kong. But we are doing I mean, some other countries are doing better in other aspects, So years of schooling, 18.5, 22 in Australia, pretty high. But then the score goes down a little bit here. Mean years of schooling goes down to 12.7. And I think the more hit that we get is in Australia is our average income, which has fallen actually in the last few years. It's now 40. Last year it was 48,000 average income. This is where Norway really picks up their game, 66,000. Well, that's a big gap between 66 and 48. Otherwise, if you think about it, life expectancy and education-wise, that is very impressive. If you look at Australia's education here, 22, whoa, it's brilliant, I would say, compared to many countries around the world. So we are doing okay. We are doing great, actually, not okay. We're doing great with life expectancy and education. Where we are taking a hit is the income part, but it's not that bad. I mean, we're still in the top 10, top 8. And then you can go to other pages and check how other countries are doing. I'm looking at what did I click? Yeah. Okay, I think I have to refresh my page, but I fear if I refresh, I'm going to, let me refresh it. You can use this link. I'm actually going to post this link for you in the chat box, so you can check it out in your free time. Yeah, there you go. Check for countries that you have visited, or if you have international students, you can check for your country of origin. Where is Singapore? Number 11, UK at 13, US 17, yay. You're ahead of United States, huh? And it goes on and on. Malta, where is Malta? Malta is 28, Italy at 29, Poland at 35. All right, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, 40, 42. Argentina, 46. There you go. Russia, 52. Mauritius, 66. Okay. Goes on and on. Thailand, 79. Sri Lanka is doing good. Sri Lanka is at 72. China is at 85. Any other countries that you have anything to do with? You must have traveled there, or your backgrounds maybe. Philippines at 107. Now comes the list where the scores are dropping. They're dropping. Yeah, there you go. South Africa, surprise, huh? South Africa is 114. India at 131. GNI 6,681. Okay. Bangladesh at 133. Nepal at 142. Zimbabwe at 150. Have a look, okay? Have a look in your own free time. Pakistan at 154, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to share this link with you in the chat box. Take a few seconds to just copy paste it somewhere, the way you like to save it. I mean, it's up to you. But here it is. There you go. It's in the chat box. And you can check out a lot of data, a lot of interesting things after we are done. Just sit down and on your smartphones, have a look at interesting data. So the link is in the chat box, and I'm going to move on from here. Okay, move ahead from this part. Back to my slides. All right, so this was HDI, Human Development Index. Guys, I want you all, okay, I want all of you now to take just 1 minute, not more, okay, 1 minute. And 1 minute is enough to think about what's on the slide. If I were to talk to you, ask you about standard of living, of course, I said GDP is not enough. We need GDP per capita. Then I said GDP capita is also not enough. Let's look at HDI, Human Development Index, which has a lot of components. It's looking at average income, it's looking at education, looking at life expectancy. Great. But do you feel, if we are talking about standard of living of economies around the world, do you think there should be other factors as well? Other factors that are not covered by GDP, GDP per capita, and HDI. Happiness index, for example, yeah, we could check happiness index as well, but something like that. What factors do you guys feel should be considered? Take 1 minute. Think to yourself, ask yourself, put yourself in that picture. What matters to you? What is affecting your standard of living? If you feel someone's standard of living is better than the other person, somebody is better off, someone's living conditions are better than another person, what factors do you feel contribute? Take a minute, and then I will share my slides, and then you can check with me, okay? But 1 minute to yourself. Okay, ready? Now, obviously, I'm not going to cover everything, okay? I have a few key important points on my slides. See if they match with yours. Ready? Has everyone thought of a few points that you feel are necessary? Okay. Now see, I'm already admitting I'm not going to cover all the points. There are so many. But if you feel I haven't covered certain points which you feel are very important, type them in the chat box. Okay. But let me start with my points. In no particular order, I would say women's rights. Very important. There are certain countries around the world where it's terrible. I mean, you can look at an index, you can Google later on, worst places in the world to be a woman. And women's rights are simply not considered in certain countries around the world, in some parts around the world. They matter. And if any particular gender's rights are not taken care of, it affects everyone. It affects not just women, but everyone. So I feel this is very important. Some things are taken for granted. We are born sometimes in societies where we have those rights, but what about those countries where they don't exist? That is bound to affect the standard of living, obviously. So I think women's rights are very important. They are an important factor, not considered in GDP, not considered in GDP per capita, not considered in HDI. So something to think about. Next. What is this? This is Syria, war. What if the country where you live or the cities where you live, there's a conflict happening right now between, you guys know, the Gaza Strip, right? Israel and Palestinian area. So Palestine and Israel have a conflict. Syria is having conflict. There's a lot of conflict around the world. Imagine living in a place where you don't know if that's going to be bombed the very next minute. You don't know if I'm sure you cannot drive on these roads, cannot ride a bicycle on these roads. I'm sure the water lines are burst, sanitation's down the roof. So life is hard. Standard of living could be affected if you're living in a region that is war-torn. So I would say war, conflict, or war-torn areas. That also determines the standard of living. Okay, next. People's lifestyle choices, people expression of sexuality. There are countries around the world where it is illegal. There are death sentences just to be gay, to belong to the LGBTIQ community. So what about the mental health of that community in those countries where you cannot dare to speak about your sexuality? So I think this is also a very important factor when it comes to standard of living. How are the rights of all the citizens protected and respected and accepted, acknowledged in the country? Okay, So I think this is also important from standard of living point of view. How about religious persecution? So my point is freedom of religion. Okay, different religions, people of different religions are persecuted in different parts of the world. I mean, I couldn't even fit it on my slide. Okay, there are Hindus persecuted in some regions. There are Muslims persecuted in other regions. Baha'i community is persecuted. Falun Gong is persecuted. Sikhs are persecuted. Rohingyas are persecuted as well. You'll be surprised, in some extremely religious countries, atheists are also persecuted. I mean, come on, you should have a freedom of expressing your religion, and you should have the freedom of expressing that you're an atheist as well. Okay, so that freedom also, is important, without which your standard of living could be affected. Pollution affects our, pollution causes contamination of water. It depends. It could be soil, land pollution, water pollution, air pollution. If you're in Singapore, Malaysia, there are days, even in Thailand sometimes, there are days when the nation shuts down. I mean, these countries are very tiny. The whole country shuts down because of high levels of pollution. I remember chatting with my friend on Skype 6 years ago, and we were having a casual chat, and he said they had a day off, and I was like, hang on, what day off? Was it some holiday, public holiday? And she said, no, it's because of pollution. This was Singapore. I was like, what? You had a day off because of pollution? And they said, yeah, it was too dangerous to get out. So pollution affects our standard of living. And of course, living in Australia or in New Zealand, we have clean air. In some parts of the world, you guys will be surprised. It depends how legit it is, but air from Australia and New Zealand is collected and sold in some countries for the rich people just to breathe and experience. And some of you must be laughing, but it is true. It's a business. So that's pollution. It affects our lives. What is this? Do you guys remember this lady who was performing aerobics during the Myanmar coup? The photo became a meme. It became pretty viral. So I'm talking about military coup in Myanmar right now. But my point is not just Myanmar. What I mean is the stability of the government, stability of the nation, stability of governance. That is also important. Imagine living in a country or in a region where you don't know who's in charge. One day a dictator is in charge, one day a military general is in charge, the other day people have taken over, there is anarchy. The next time there is suddenly a president who says that president is the people's president. What is happening in Tunisia right now? Same problems. So instability of governments also affect our standard of living. Has happened in Somalia decades ago, when there was instability of Somali government, lack of governance, lack of prescribed law of the nation. What happened? European vessels used to dump illegal waste on the coast of Somalia when they had a tsunami, and the waste was washed up. They were shocked to see what was being dumped. The beaches were filled with 2-story, 3-story high garbage after the tsunami, and that's when they realized, wow, because they had lack of stability in the government, other countries were taking advantage of their coast. So stability matters a lot as well. What is this? Population. We looked at the role of population in GDP, but imagine being in a country that's densely populated. Every day would be a struggle. Getting on public transport, as you can see in this particular picture. People are not crazy. People are not excited to be on top of the trains. It's just that if they don't get on top of the trains, they might have to wait for days. The transportation will come to a standstill. So, and we know resources are limited from our first week. With limited resources and an explosion of population, life is tough. It's not easy. You'll have traffic, you'll have issues with public transportation, you'll have excessive competition for jobs, excessive competition everywhere, pretty much chaotic. And that affects our life. That will affect our standard of living. So, do you feel there are other factors as well? Surely I've covered the main ones, but I haven't covered all. Would anyone like to unmute and quickly go for a few points that you feel are also important when it comes to standard of living? If you're shy to speak, you can type in the chat box. I'll give you a few seconds to speak up, otherwise I'll move to the next part. I mean, with the freedom part, you can go on and on. I spoke about freedom of sexuality and freedom of speech, but you can have freedom of religion, you can have freedom of press as well. In some countries, the press, as in journalists, by press, I mean journalists, so they don't have enough freedom. Yes, Michaela, racial discrimination, so racism, yes, I agree with you. In some parts of the world, there is very high racial discrimination. In some countries, there is, some communities are targeted. I mean, why did we have the Black Lives Matter movement? For a reason, isn't it? So yes, you are right. Racism also affects standard of living. Yeah, true. Access to healthcare. Absolutely, James. Access to healthcare and distribution of healthcare as well matters. I agree with you, James. Good. Mirna, poverty. Yeah. In fact, Mirna, you know what? Poverty, you are right. And also distribution of wealth. Sometimes the average income of a particular country is, I mean, it's average, but you have certain areas that are extremely poor, certain areas that are extremely rich as well. So yeah, distribution of income and poverty, of course, affects. Gurneet, Gunrit, you're right, access to education. However, access to education is linked with the education factor from HDI. So yes, you are right, but we are covering it in HDI, okay? Nathan, suicide rates. Yes, you're right. But Nathan, instead of looking at the rate, we could go back to the cause of suicide. And we could say those causes are the factors that determine standard of living. So yes, absolutely right. Suicide rates matter. But let us go a step back and say why. What is pushing people towards suicide? Those reasons will be important. So yes, I like your answers. All right. No more? Excellent. Thanks for the contribution. Dalvir, you said state of well-being. You are right. But what we are looking at right now is basically towards well-being. Okay. So all these factors are working towards well-being. Unless you can break well-being down and split it up into something very specific, okay? You could talk about rights of different groups and how the government respects those rights, I know in some parts of the world you have farmers' protests going on. So the approach of the government towards the farmers, you could say that shows the well-being of farmers, and you could bring that point and say that matters as well towards standard of living, okay? So that way you could join things. All right. So moving on, everyone, let's move to the next part. So far, based on whatever I have said, okay, let's test your knowledge. No marks for this. This is just fun. I'm going to share this link in the chat box for you. Give me a second, okay? I need to copy it first, and then we'll do it, okay? A few more things to go today, guys. A few more things. I want to do the workbook with you, but the workbook won't take long. It will be very fast because we've kind of covered everything that's in the workbook, but I'll do it with you. So we will be pushing it a bit, but we'll see how it goes. So look at the chat box, please, everyone. I've just posted a link just now. It says practice.mru.org. Please visit that link and attempt the quiz. See, check your own understanding of the concepts. I will give you I wanted to give you 10 minutes, but I'll give you 5 to 6 minutes, okay? So please start doing this test, and then I will do it as well, okay? But after you're done. So yeah, check your understanding. It's a fun test, and then I'll actually the test shares the answers with you, but I will do it anyway. Okay, I'll do it in 5 minutes. I think a few of you might have finished already. I'll just give you another minute, try to finish it off quickly, and then I'll quickly go through all the answers as well. All right, see, houses include depreciation. We have used the houses as well. It's like selling a second-hand good, but also, more importantly, houses are looked upon as fixed assets. They're looked upon as investments in the long run. So just selling a house, okay, unless it's completely demolished and used by a commercial company to build a new building, it won't really be included. So I'd go for no. And it's correct, okay. Next one. What's included in the GDP? I mean, it's talking about US, but the Australian one is almost the same. Candle, your friend bought a US-made candle at Target. Now, you are in the US, that's what we assume, okay? Your friend bought a US-made candle, okay? If it's locally made, it's in the GDP. Absolutely. Yep, there you go. It is a final good when in the US, so it's done. It works towards GDP. Gaming console. Your friend bought a gaming console at local Walmart, but the gaming console was manufactured overseas. Guys, if it's manufactured elsewhere, it's not a part of your GDP, because remember the definition, final value of all the goods and services produced in that country. So this is not produced in the country. We are pretending to be Americans right now. So no, not this one. Correct, there you go. Uber, yeah, Uber, yeah. Absolutely. Local American, you're using an Uber. So yes. Netflix, yeah. Netflix as well, a part of the GDP. Government spending, your parents received a stimulus check from the US federal government. See, government spending on roads and infrastructure and schools is counted, not stimulus packages, okay? So that's no. Yep, stimulus check is a government transfer. Only a government purchase is included in GDP. Camp, you pay $1,000 for a 1-week adventure camp. Yeah, it's a service, you're paying for the service, so I would say yeah. There you go, but it's a part of GDP. Haircut, you cut your dad's hair. Doesn't matter what you do, if you haven't paid for it, if you haven't gotten a professional registered service, it's not a part of GDP, so no. Instagram, your sister joined Instagram, American, local, yeah, but do you pay to get on Insta? Not really. So there's no payment involved. That's why no. Poster, a Canadian resident bought an art poster created in the US. Yeah, but it's not purchased by someone who's local, yeah? We look at what local people purchase, the transactions done by local people. So this is tricky though. The thing is, you are basically exporting this to another person. So this should go in your exports, but I know this website doesn't agree. So I'll say no for now. Oh, okay, so I was right. It should be a part of export. So it goes in, yes, it should go in the GDP part. So there you go. That last part. Now I have to pay for it. Yeah, now it won't allow me again. But yeah, like I said, I said it should be a part of export, but then I dragged it to the other side. That's the thing. So yeah, it is a part of GDP, obviously. So there you go. How did you guys go with the game? Still doing it? Not bad. That's pretty good scores. Jacob got full 10 on 10. Well done. And some 8 on 10s as well. Good job, guys. Fantastic. Well, now we move to a few other items that I want to cover with you. So let's get back to my slides. Next part is a few useful and reliable sources. The thing is, in this subject, and not just to this topic, instead of just Googling, it's really recommended that you that you go for reliable sources. The one I used today, I showed you, it's UNDP. Apart from that, that's the one right at the bottom of this page, but you can use these other sources as well. So start enjoying your economics journey with these links. One is data.gov.au, pretty useful. Then you got RBA, Reserve Bank of Australia. They have pretty good information on all monetary policies. Then you have ABS, of course, for all the statistics and data. Apart from the Australian ones, you have CIA World Factbook, which is fantastic with regards to data from each country. There are a lot of economic indicators. Then you got IMF, which is International Monetary Fund, and then, of course, United Nations Development Program. I haven't written one over here. You can also check World Bank. So World Bank has very good data as well. And if you are used to La Trobe Library, there is an excellent database that we have at La Trobe Library. It's called Market Line Advantage. You might want to check that out. It's called Market Line Advantage. You go to the La Trobe Library, click on databases, click for M, and then look for Market Line Advantage. For general public, it's paid. They don't have access to it. They have to pay a membership. But as students of La Trobe, you have free access to it. So go crazy, download whatever reports you want to download. It's very useful. Moving on, let us, as I said at the start of the class, let us quickly revisit the LMS page, and then I'll do the workbook with you, and then we'll be done. Okay, so let me shut down my presentation. And take you to the LMS page. There's a few things I want to talk to you about. Okay, some of you may have missed it, but I just want to repeat again. Sometimes there is so much of information that you tend to miss on a few items. I've started sharing my screen with you. This is our home page. Not going through everything, of course, okay? But scrolling down and going to the part that says Start Here. So I'm going to click on Start Here. Once you click there and scroll down, it takes you to a link that says Subject Learning Guide. Let's click on that together. It takes you to a new page. The SLG will open. That's the Subject Learning Guide. The reason for drawing you here is to show you the schedule in case someone has missed it last week, and just a reminder from my end. So in this particular subject, you got an assessment, you got online quizzes, and you got a final exam. So those online quizzes are called online exercises, okay? There are 5, and the best 4, the grade for the best 4 will be counted for. Now, the schedule for those is given on the Subject Learning Guide. So we are here today, okay? And there is one due next week. So there is one due on 3rd. It says due on 9th of August, okay? So it will open next week and it will close the same week. So it's happening in week 3. And this test will be based on the topics from the first 2 weeks. So what we did last week and what we did today, that will be a part of exercise number 1, okay? Now the next question is, where do you find this quiz that is due next week? So let's exit this Subject Learning Guide. And let us go back to the home page again. And under the home page, click on Assessments, okay? It tells you again, Assessment 1, online exercises, best 4 out of 5. And here we go. It says, Assessment 1, online exercises. See the schedule? I just showed you the schedule, and it says submission links. So the first one is due in week 3. You can check if the link is active. If not, it will get active on Monday, but the link will close at the end of next week. Okay, so you can click on it and then answer whatever is in there. It's open book, obviously, because you're doing it from the comfort of your home. So wherever you choose to go and get this done. So that's really in your own hands. It's timed, but then, yeah, it's open book. And the questions are very straightforward. And there is some gap given. There is some space given for you to write the answers as well. So it's pretty straightforward. You can, don't forget to attempt this, please, okay? So you have been reminded to get your online quizzes done. Now, let's move to the workbook, which shouldn't take too long. Is the workbook visible on your screen? I've just shared the page, the workbook. Sometimes there is a lag, so I'm asking you guys. So this is your workbook for this week. Now, technically, you're supposed to finish these before coming to the class, but see how you go, okay? I'm going to scroll through the problems. It shouldn't take us too long because we have done everything already, okay? So the problems, first question that you were supposed to do was GDP. It says, explain why economic income must equal the expenditure. I've given you the explanation for this. You can revert back to week 1's circular flow diagram, where everything incoming for a household, for a resource market, is an outgoing from the product market, and the other way around. So you can give examples of resource market and product market and say how one's income is the other's expenditure. It says list the 4 components of GDP, that is C for consumption, I for investment, G for government spending, and X for net exports. What components of GDP would each of the following affect? A family buys a new air conditioner, that is C for consumption. Uncle Macro buys a new house, house is an investment. You buy a pizza is a consumption. The government of New South Wales creates a bike path around Sydney, that is government spending. And your parents buy a bottle of South African wine, that is an import because they're importing it. It's not made in Australia. So that will go under minus in the NX, exports minus imports, so it'll go to the import part. If prices raise people's income from selling goods, if prices raise people's income from selling goods increases, that is such a weird way of writing it. Anyway, why do economists prefer using real GDP as a measure of economic well-being rather than nominal GDP? They use real GDP because it's easy to compare. Why do we want to know GDP? Do we really want to compete with other nations? No, we want to know if our nation is doing better than it used to do before. The governments want to know if their government has done better than the previous government. We want to know how we are doing in each quarter as well. So basically, it's a test for us to know how we are doing against ourselves. And for that reason, we consider inflation and we use real GDP, so we know exactly how we compare against us. If we only compare nominal GDP, we are not accounting for inflation. That comparison will be flawed. That's why we use real GDP. A friend tells you that the GDP, some typos here, okay, in the workbook, but that's okay. A friend tells you that the GDP of China is 3 times the GDP of Switzerland. Okay, does this imply that China is better off economically than Switzerland? Why or why not? You see, it definitely shows that consumption is high in China. In fact, for those of you who still have stayed and haven't left, consumption almost on an average contributes to 50% of the entire GDP. It's that important. In some countries, it's even more. It's almost 60% of the GDP. So it's a big factor. So in China, are they better off? Well, their consumption is higher, their population is higher. They manufacture a lot, so a lot of jobs are created. They export a lot, so a lot of countries depend on their exports. But other than that, no, we can't say it's economically better off because we have to check average income, we have to check GNI or GDP per capita, we have to look at HDI, we have to look at the other factors that I listed as well. And of course, if we look at HDI, Switzerland is ranked way higher than China. So no, you tell your friend about HDI and factors that affect standard of living. Question 2, define frictional, structural, cyclical unemployment. I've done that with you guys. Okay, one is temporary, one is mismatch of jobs, and one is because of shortage of jobs. What is inflation rate? Inflation rate is the change of the price of each basket. So basket in the new year minus the basket in the previous year divided by the old one times 100 gives you the inflation rate. Basically, new minus old divided by old times 100. That gives you the inflation rate. And with that, it's just 1 minute past 4. We have done everything that was prescribed. You might come across in your readings, you might come across a term called GNP. So what we did today was GDP. There is also something called GNP, Gross National Product. Now, there's a tiny difference in these two, and it's very simple for those of you who have stayed back. You see, GDP, what we have been saying today, is what is produced in the country. Now, that is regardless of who is staying in a country. So you might have people who are tourists. Okay, tourists are not residents, tourists are not nationals. They are coming from another country. But if those tourists consume in your country, so let's say they go to a local family-owned pizza shop, okay, that consumption is contributing to GDP of Australia, but not GNP. GNP, gross national product, is what your citizens consume around the world. Okay, so that's something that you will come across in your readings. If you get confused, you can email me and ask me again. Treat it like this, okay? Treat it like this. Let's say I'll give you my example, okay? Now, I'm originally from India, okay? Still an Indian citizen, okay, although I live here for 13 years. So we're looking at citizens, okay? Now, I buy things over here, I consume things over here, I pay tax over here, very heavy tax actually. So that is my contribution to Australian GDP. Even international students, locals, everyone is contributing to Australian GDP. But because I'm Indian citizen, my passport is Indian, although I live here, everything that I produce or everything that I consume is counted towards Indian GNP, gross national product. So GDP is to do with the borders, what happens in the country. GNP is not about borders, it is about what your citizens do around the world. So have a read of GNP and GDP as well. If not, let me know. Now, those of you who have stayed back, I have a YouTube video that I've made to simplify a few concepts for you. So just a second, I'm gonna stop sharing the, or you know what, I'll post that link in the announcement section. So do one thing, after we are done, tomorrow or day after tomorrow, visit the announcement section of LMS and check for the YouTube link that I've made for all of you. And if you're not in a rush, then just stay here for a minute. I'll share it with you now. And those who don't want to stay, well, I'll see you next week, but just a minute. I'm not able to minimize this page. I don't know why. Yeah, leave it. Leave it. Check the announcements, okay? And I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers. No worries. Thanks, Dalvir.